Before we can structure our teams to be high performing teams, we really have to consider the capability of our team members and the potential for each team member to grow, because everybody has different capabilities and a different trajectory for their growth. You know, you can't go look at a team and expect everybody on the team to be Michael Jordan. Some people have a different path, and some people have a different level at which they're going to be able to achieve based on the role they're playing. And I learned that when I was supervising a team of individuals from a variety of backgrounds, including age, ethnicity, sex, and language, just to name a few things. And I came in there with my own sense of identity and what I wanted to accomplish. I had two clear goals before I left that role. Number one, I wanted to implement an organization-wide IT system. And number two, I wanted to automate all of the processes within the team to enable the team to telework, you know, and be in this hybrid environment. Now, this was before working in a hybrid environment became a thing. And I had to pause because I had to take a moment to examine each person, to get to know them, to get to know their strengths and their weaknesses and their desires and aspirations as individuals. You had some people who were at the beginning of their careers and they had high hopes and aspirations, and they wanted to stretch their minds and their bodies and to do a lot of things in a short amount of time. I also had individuals on the team that were later on in their careers or either in the middle part of their careers, and they were just still trying to figure out where they fit. They were trying to figure out where they wanted their career to go from where they were at the point that I had met them. Some of the individuals, after working with me, had discovered that they wanted to go back to school, even though they were a few years off from retirement. But it took a lot of individual work with each of the team members in order to discover their capabilities, in order to unlock their full potential, and actually for them to be able to see their full potential, because sometimes people won't see their full potential until we challenge them. But that takes time. And after you take the time to understand your team's capabilities and to work around those capabilities within the goals that you set, now it's time to think about, how do we create a high performance team? Now, creating a high performance team involves empowering the team in a few key areas. Number one is empowering the team with the authority to make decisions. You know, I love it when I speak to managers and they say, well, I empower my team to make decisions. They can make as many decisions as they want, but as soon as they make a decision, they're in there with their hand in the cookie jar saying, oh, no, because they've trained themselves and trained the team to need them. Because when they relinquish that control, it speaks to their insecurity within themselves, because they want to be needed. They want to feel valued. And the only way that they feel valued is by having their staff members continuously need them and to ask them questions. And so they don't offer them freedom of decision. Now, that's just one example of where relinquishing freedom of decision that I've seen has caused problems for some managers. The second thing is freedom of time. You know, I've talked about the 20% policy that Google implemented, where they created freedom of time for their employees to focus on innovation. So freedom of time would be the second area where you are empowering your team. And then last, empowering your team by providing adequate resources to achieve the goals. The team can only be as successful as the resources provided to enable their success. You can't expect the team to build a wall and you haven't provided them with any tools, a concrete wall without any mortar, or the other things that are necessary for them to build the concrete wall. And so in these three areas, we want to be able to empower our teams. Now, empowerment requires managers to do what? Relinquish control. And as I said earlier, it becomes difficult to relinquish control, because when you relinquish control, and the team starts to fly and thrive, then we sometimes as managers become insecure because the team doesn't need us. And then how do we articulate our value as managers? Because we've developed the team to a point where they don't need us. So how are we useful? And sometimes the only way we know how to be useful is creating an environment where the team still needs to come to us and ask us questions, because that's how we feel we keep our leg up. That's how we feel that we keep our and maintain our value. I even see that when I'm talking to some young people with their parents. Their parents are sometimes afraid to allow them to fly as young children, because when they leave the nest, what are they left with? It's a very scary thing when we start to talk about relinquishing control, especially when you're in an authoritative position. Now, think about it. Again, think about when we learn to walk. Your parent or your guardian guided you. They watched you, and in some instances, they were there to catch you when you fell. But at some point, they had to let you go. They had to allow you to walk and ultimately run on your own. But even in our adult years, how many of us still stumble and fall? How many of us still trip up and fall every now and again? It happens. And the same occurs in these areas. We've got to develop a plan as managers to allow our teams to walk and ultimately run on their own, without the fear that them running on their own means that I now become invaluable to the organization, because we're too afraid to reinvent ourselves and redefine our value. It's not just about the team being high performing. It's also about us as managers being high performing, and high performing managers create high performing people so that we can continue to elevate and sharpen one another and help them to maximize their effectiveness in each of the areas that I just mentioned after we've relinquished the control. And so we're helping them to maximize their effectiveness in the area of decision making, in the utilization of their time, and in the usage of the resources that we've given them control over. You have to develop a plan to let go. Now, in my experience, the first level of management typically focuses on tactical decisions, the actions that are taken to accomplish a task. Now, the middle layer of management typically focuses on strategy and risk management, while the highest layer of management is keenly focused on things like vision and culture. Now, at these various levels, there are different decisions that need to be made. There are different decisions associated with each layer of management. Therefore, empowerment refers to the degree of decision making, time, and financial freedom that you give your teams at each of these layers that enables them to accomplish their goals. And ultimately, you want to be making less and less decisions up at the top and allow more and more decisions to be made on the front lines, because that's true empowerment, when the people that support us have more autonomy and more control over their lives at work. This doesn't mean that we aren't holding them accountable and that there aren't measurements that we put in place to ensure that we're holding everybody as being held accountable for producing what they're supposed to produce. Even people at the senior executive levels, their support staff still have to sometimes tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I know you don't want to go to this meeting, but guess what? You got to go. It's important. Here's why. Get up off the couch. Come on. Let's go listen to them drone on about topic X, Y, and Z. Everybody needs accountability. So this doesn't mean that because you relinquish your more control to individuals that are at quote unquote lower levels in the other organization that you lose control, because there's still a duty to hold people accountable. Now, one of the most interesting top stories I've read and learned about that really speaks to the spirit of relinquishing control is Spotify's innovative squad culture. Now, this culture and this structure really decentralized decision making, which really helped to transform productivity and innovation within Spotify's business. The squad model is like one of the most creative organizational innovations that I've seen, because instead of establishing a traditional hierarchical team, Spotify organized its employees into autonomous squads with their own leadership. And so each squad is responsible for its own goals, and it operates sort of like a mini startup. Now, I thought that this was huge for it to be done within a company, because this structure has been enabled within Spotify to rapidly innovate a lot of the music innovations that they come up with in the area of in the music streaming industry. And so one of the things that you might be aware of is Spotify's Discover Weekly playlist feature, which really is one of the key examples of an innovation that has come out of this squad culture, because it came from a team that decided, hey, we want to create something that recommends personalized music. And it emerged from this autonomous squad culture. Now, this culture of decentralized decision making, it really is one of the things that I believe has kept Spotify at the forefront of the music streaming industry. And I think that it's something that individuals from every industry can learn from, because the more we decentralize decision making, the more efficient we become. Decentralizing decision making really is an excellent way to increase the performance of your teams, especially when you're talking about building and developing a high performance team. You can't be a high performance team if the person in charge of the team is chiming in every time you make a decision. Hey, no, don't dribble the ball that way. Dribble it this way. Hey, don't. I mean, you can be on the sidelines, but at the end of the day, the team still has to play in the game. Let them play. During the break, chime in. Give them the guidance. Go back to playing. But having this decentralized decision making is huge, because it really does empower your team and it reduces decision-making bottlenecks. Now, one example, that I thought about in my own life is when I was hiring a management company to oversee a portfolio of properties. And in the agreement, there was a clause that stipulated that there was an amount of money that could be spent on addressing maintenance issues without having to seek approval from me. And so I was elated at this, because what did it do? It enabled them to provide efficient service to my tenants without the added bottleneck of coming to me, waiting until I approved it, nitpicking through certain things like I can tend to do and overthink certain things. And it allowed me to build trust with them. Going back to this concept of trust, which I talk about a lot because it is extremely important. And so how do you develop a plan where you're continuously and gradually relinquishing control so that you can develop a level of trust with your team, and then they can become more autonomous? Because for some teams, it's more of a planned rollout. And I get it. It can be very, very complex at times. Now, again, when I was working with this management team, they didn't have to come to me with certain expenses. They were able to handle it on their own, and ultimately it created a better experience for the tenants when dealing with the management company. And that's the same thing that you're trying to create. You're trying to empower your teams so that when they're dealing with the customers or when they're dealing with other people within the organization, they feel empowered to operate at a certain level without your intervention, without you hovering over their shoulder at every turn to say to them, let me micromanage this decision. Let me micromanage how you're using your time. I would use my time this way. And so I would challenge everyone under the sound of my voice. If you are considering implementing anything, first examine the capabilities of your team. Then examine the tasks. Then consider what degree of decision-making, time, and financial freedom you are willing to give each team member in order to dedicate to delivering a greater level of innovation within your organization. Because when you sit down and you do that work, I know it can be complex because you'll have to spend time getting to know them, getting to know their strengths and their weaknesses, developing a plan to relinquish more control to these individuals so that they can thrive and be their best. And so that is something that takes time. But as we've seen in the case of Spotify, it can be very rewarding, not just for the individuals, but also for your organizations. Thank you.